This is D-Dub. This is a D&D 5e channel all about creating interesting battle maps using interesting creatures. Today we're going to use the Aboleth. I was thinking about doing this creature because I had an encounter with a DM of mine, and I was thinking about this is kind of similar to the one that he ran, but this is more maybe of something I would change to make it have less mind control over the party. Now, if you don't know what an aboleth is, it's typically a lawful evil creature. It can speak deep. It's more of an aquatic creature because it has a lot faster swim speed, um, where its movement speed on land is only 10 feet, which is extremely so in D&D terms. It has extremely good dark vision. It can see 120 feet. It has a passive perception of 20, which is amazing. And its telepathy, which is it can speak to you directly to you, is 120 feet. Now, the aboleth has a lot of really cool things. It can breathe both in air and water. So when it comes up out of the water, even though it has a slower movement speed, it can still, it can still get around without having to start rolling for context or anything like that. It has an ability called the Mucus Cloud, where I'll just read it off for you. While underwater, the aboleth is surrounded by a transformative mucus. A creature that touches the aboleth or hits it with a melee attack within 5 feet of it must make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw. On a failure, the creature is diseased for 1d4 hours. This diseased creature can only breathe underwater. That's a really cool effect. Because if you want your party members to stay underwater for a bit, this would be a really interesting effect that you can kind of lead into something else to where maybe exploring an underwater cave. This would be a really good, maybe if you drop the aboleth down a little bit, get a few of its tentacle attacks out, and then you can kind of have an underwater exploration type of encounter, which is really fun. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. It has the probing telepathy. This is at the 120 feet. If a creature communicates telepathically with the aboleth learns typically the creature's greatest desires if the aboleth can see that creature. Now, this is really cool because they can also lead you to the water potentially if it can present something that you want. Maybe if it can convince somebody else that came before to give you what you want. But there's a lot of interesting things you can do with that. Now, if we're talking about its attack actions, it has a multi-attack, so typically if it does its multi-attack, it does the 3 tentacle attacks. Now, the tentacle attacks are also really cool. Not only that they're damaging, but they also do a DC 14 Constitution saving throw, which the diseased creature then essentially can't leave the water without being damaged, or it has to moisturize itself. And that's pretty much what it is. Like I said, this is more of another ability that will allow you to do that underwater type of encounter after this point. So this could lead you into like a cave exploration or something like that. It could be like an accidental cave exploration where the party members may decide to go deeper in because they all can't really leave the water. It's just an interesting thing that you can use this to like lead into something else. Now, its basic, what I consider its basic attack is the tail attack, which is pretty much just the damage. It can do this after each other player's turn. After a player's turn, it can do a 1 free tail attack because it can take up to 3 legendary actions per turn, which is pretty cool. It's legendary actions are okay. There's a couple things that can do. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is the ability that I think is really cool, is the enslave. Now, the enslave is kind of what I would do a little bit differently than my previous DM did. Is that I wouldn't use this on the players just because I don't like charming players. Now, charming players, yeah, they still have somewhat control, but it always gets kind of muddled with the fact that when you charm a player, there's semi-control. You can semi-encourage a player to do different things. I typically don't like doing that. There are plenty of cases where I will, but I think it's more fun to have maybe somebody else charmed. So I drew out a little sketch here. Nothing by any means an advanced sketch, but it just helped me get an idea of kind of what I wanted to do for an encounter, and I'll give you guys a rundown of that in a second, once I'm finished kind of reading off this stuff. So the enslaved is kind of cool. It allows you to control a creature for 24 hours. They can repeat it if it takes damage. Pretty simple stuff. The legendary actions, it can do that tail swipe like I was saying. It can do a detect, which is essentially a free perception check at a roll, which is really strong, especially if the party has invisibility or something that allows them to reduce its ability to see. Psychic Drain is that it can absorb damage pretty much, or it can do damage to a NPC that it has charmed, and it can take that health for itself. So that's a cool ability. So now that I've given you a rundown of the Aboleth, I want to do a quick rundown of a cool encounter that I happen to think is interesting, and feel free to run it yourself, feel free to change it, or do whatever you like. But essentially it's something like this. It's maybe the party was tasked with going out and finding out what's going on with these missing travelers and missing merchants. So as they're traveling along and down the road, they come across a merchant. And a merchant has a spilled over card. And a lot of the cards are either spilled out into on the bank of a river or the crest of a lake. Either one, doesn't really matter. Now, the merchant is being controlled by the Aboleth. And the Aboleth essentially is trying to use its ability to enslave to convince other travelers to go into the water. And that's, I think, a more interesting use of the enslaved than using it on the party, because it's more of a convincing thing. And it's probably a lot easier to enslave an NPC rather than a player. So it also gives the ability much earlier on and allows it to have an effect beyond a direct attack effect. So I may have the players insight it if they want, and they can maybe roll it as like a DC 15, somewhere around there, to see if like there's something off about the merchant. I would say like, as the party approaches, the merchant addresses them and it's like, "Oh, thank gosh, you've came along. I've spilled out a bunch of my goods into the river, and I don't know how far they've gone down, but I've lost a precious pouch of gems. And if you recover them for me, I will let you keep the lion's share." And so if the party agrees, or if the party wants to investigate further into what's going on with this merchant, they could see maybe that the merchant seems distressed or is looking away, his eyes are muddled, something along those lines, but the merchant seems to be telling the truth. Maybe those gems are in the water. Now, if the party wants to head further into the river at this point, or they can choose to ignore it. That's a beautiful thing about this quest. They might not think this is anything of it. Maybe they think this is a prelude. Maybe they camp out in the nearby woods. But if the party goes into it, then they have the encounter with the Aboleth. And so I would take it one step further and allow them to fight with the Aboleth maybe a little bit. Try to get them to have that aquatic setting towards either making them breathe underwater, forced to breathe underwater for 1d4 hours, and then having the Aboleth flee to the underwater cave or the underwater spring. And then have a more rich encounter built in further there. So we're having maybe a cave system where some information about your campaign or something along those lines. Don't make it an empty cave. Nobody likes an empty cave. Put those gems in there. Put whatever in there. Put a lot of the stuff just is happening to fall into that space. Allow the players to succeed. Allow them to get the gems. But maybe the Aboleth flees into the spring, and then in that spring there is an environmental effect that you give the Aboleth at this point. Let's say if you weaken the Aboleth, because it is like it is a challenge rating 10, so it is more for like a party of 4 where they're about 8th level maybe. It's kind of challenging at that level, but it's not necessarily maybe a higher level for most campaigns, because I think most campaigns go to level 10. But like I said, have them so they can win. But maybe give an environmental effect to the Aboleth. Maybe that with its increased movement underwater, if it takes a dash effect up against the top of the cave wall, it can knock down stones on party members that are underneath them. Just an interesting effect. Makes it a little bit more dynamic, gives it more interesting abilities. It already has a lot of interesting abilities, but it is something that changes it up and makes it unique and makes it a little bit more of your own. And now one of the abilities that I said I would return on to earlier is the Psychic Drain ability. So one creature charmed by the Aboleth takes essentially 10 psychic damage. The Aboleth regains hit points equal to the damage the creature takes. Now, maybe whenever the party members are suddenly fighting, and if the combat takes too long with the Aboleth may choose to Psychic Drain the NPC that's on the bank of the river. Now, if this happens, the party members might come up and find that the NPC is lying dead on the side of the cart. That's fine and all, but maybe add a moral quandary to that. Maybe find that if they investigate what's inside the cart, maybe find some valuables. It's rewarding to the players, but maybe also let them find maybe a book that has maybe a lover for the NPC, or a family member that he sends gold and valuables back to them to help support the family, and this is what he does. He's a traveling merchant, obviously. And maybe give it a moral quandary of like, he has an address, he has like postage or something like that. So maybe the party can choose to maybe go to those NPCs' house and maybe give those gems back to the party, to the family, or choose to keep it for themselves. That choice is kind of yours. But that's all I got for today. Please like and subscribe for more content like this. If you have any comments or anything that you would like to suggest, please let me know in the comments below.